It started as a simple act of defiance, a stand for the right thing. But when the HOA chairwoman, Karen Bishop, destroyed Jacob Logan's life-saving insulin, it almost cost him his life. The reason? She thought the medical fridge on the side of their house marred the aesthetic of their neighborhood. It didn't matter to her that it was a necessity for an 8-year-old with type 1 diabetes. She valued her rules more than a child's life and didn't expect anyone to challenge her authority. But Jacob's mother, Cassie, wasn't going to let this pass quietly. What began as one mother's fight for her son quickly snowballed into something far bigger, and it ended in a victory no one had anticipated. The battle for justice raged, and in the end, the right side triumphed, while the neighborhood kids kicked soccer balls in the background, oblivious to the war that had erupted under the fading orange sun. Jacob Logan, an 8-year-old boy, sat on the wooden front steps of his house, his knees pulled to his chest, a tablet resting limply on his lap. He wasn't really playing. He was waiting. Monitoring his body, anticipating any signs of danger. A single wrong move with his blood sugar could send him into dizziness, seizures, unconsciousness, or worse. For Jacob, it wasn't paranoia, it was survival. The constant need to keep his blood sugar in check meant every movement, every action was calculated. Cassie, a nurse with trauma training, understood the stakes better than anyone. She lived in a state of constant vigilance, her life divided into before and after Jacob's diagnosis. Every part of her day was planned meticulously, meals, naps, and time spent outside. But none of that mattered more than keeping her son safe. To do so, she had set up a small, medical-grade insulin fridge just outside their home, under a shaded overhang. It was discreet, practical, and essential. Jacob's life could depend on it. If he needed insulin while Cassie was at work, Marcus, his older cousin who stayed with him during the day, would have immediate access. However, not everyone saw the fridge the same way. Karen Bishop, the chairwoman of the HOA, took one look at it and decided it didn't belong. To her, it wasn't a necessary medical appliance, it was an eyesore, something that marred the perfect aesthetic of their community. She didn't care about Jacob's health, nor did she ask questions or take into account Cassie's request for an exemption. She made her decision, and the next day, Cassie arrived home after a long shift to find the fridge gone, its door left open and its contents, including the insulin, completely missing. Frozen, Cassie rushed to the spot where the fridge had been. The door hung at a strange angle as though it had been ripped open, and there was nothing inside, not the insulin, not the emergency supplies, just a smear of condensation inside the fridge. Panic surged through Cassie's veins as she rushed inside to find Jacob, pale and shivering, on the couch. His lips were dry, his forehead damp with sweat. He wasn't asleep, but he wasn't fully conscious either. His cousin Marcus, terrified, explained that Jacob's head hurt and that he was fading. Cassie didn't hesitate, her hands were already dialing 911 as she checked Jacob's pulse. It was weak, slow. His skin felt cold, and she could see his body slipping into an emergency. The dispatcher's voice on the other end of the line was a blur as Cassie choked out the words, type 1 diabetic child, insulin missing, possible DKA. Hurry. Karen arrived just then, standing on the porch with her clipboard, her posture straight, her lips stretched into that insufferable smile. I went ahead and removed that thing, she said, as if discussing the weather. It violated HOA guidelines. Honestly, it was an eyesore. I'm sure you understand. Cassie couldn't even respond. She stared at Karen, too shocked, too horrified to scream. Karen, completely unaware of the gravity of her actions, continued explaining away her decision, as if she were tidying up a minor infraction. Section 4, line 17, Karen said, referring to the HOA rules. No unauthorized exterior units visible from the street. This is a community, Miss Logan. Rules are what keep us civilized. In that moment, the world seemed to tilt beneath Cassie's feet. Jacob was slipping into the kind of crisis that no mother should have to watch, and Karen was discussing aesthetics. Cassie could barely hold back her tears. The paramedics arrived within 9 minutes, and though Cassie replayed those 9 minutes in her mind over and over, they did nothing to lessen the sting of seeing her son so weak. His blood sugar was dangerously high, over 400. The EMTs worked quickly, inserting 4 lines, strapping him to monitors, and securing his oxygen mask. Cassie's sobs broke through as she explained the situation to the paramedics. At the hospital, the chaos of the ER felt like a world apart. The doctors and nurses worked rapidly to stabilize Jacob. Severe hypoglycemia, someone called out. We need to get this under control. Cassie stood in the corner, helpless, watching her son's life hang by a thread. When Jacob finally stabilized, the attending physician pulled her aside and spoke in a calm, measured tone, "You got lucky. If you'd arrived 5 minutes later, we would have been talking about a coma, maybe even cardiac arrest." Cassie nodded silently. The weight of those words sank deep into her chest. When she sat beside Jacob's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, she wondered how it had come to this. One woman's entitled disregard for her son's health had nearly killed him. The next day, after the terrifying night, Cassie received an unexpected visit from Justin Moore, a quiet neighbor across the street. He looked uncomfortable as he fidgeted with his baseball cap. "Cassie, I need to tell you something," he said, stepping into the hospital room. "Yesterday around 2 o'clock, I saw Karen outside. She was wearing gloves and pouring something into the storm drain behind your house. Then she pushed your fridge into the HOA truck when it came by. I figured you told her to do it, but now I think I should have stopped her." Cassie blinked, stunned. "You saw her?" she asked. Justin nodded, his voice thick with guilt. "I didn't realize what was in there. I thought I should have stopped her. I should have said something." The realization hit Cassie harder than she expected. No one had stepped in. No one had called her, no one had tried to stop Karen. They'd all stood by and watched, and now her son was fighting for his life because of their silence. Her neighbors, the people she'd thought she could trust, had let this happen. Rage, cold and unyielding, began to grow inside her. Cassie had never been one to swallow pain quietly. It sharpened her resolve, and the next day, still in a daze, she went to the police station, no makeup, no pretense. She stood before the officer at the desk, her hands shaking but her eyes steady. "I want to file a criminal report," she said. "Attempted murder." The officer blinked. "Excuse me?" "Karen Bishop," Cassie replied, her voice cold and controlled. "She destroyed my son's life-saving insulin. She dumped it, tossed it into the trash, into the sewer. My son almost died. That wasn't vandalism or a misunderstanding, it was an act that could have killed him. I want it on record." The officer hesitated, his pen clicking nervously. "Are you sure this wasn't just a neighborhood dispute? HOA rules, these things happen all the time." Cassie leaned in, her voice low, her eyes never leaving his. "You don't understand. She almost killed my child. This isn't just a rule violation." And so, the fight for justice began, one mother's determination to make sure that no one would ever again confuse the value of rules with the value of a child's life. "Do you believe a neighborhood dispute should lead to a child ending up in the pediatric ICU?" The officer said nothing. Cassie continued, her voice steady and resolute. "Karen Bishop destroyed a medical-grade fridge that was clearly labeled with emergency medical tags. She didn't ask questions. She didn't wait for approval. She acted on her own authority, making a choice that put a child's life in danger. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a deliberate act of aggression with potentially life-threatening consequences." He met her gaze for a long moment before nodding slowly, silently beginning the paperwork. By that evening, Karen Bishop was served a court summons for willfully destroying life-preserving medical equipment and endangering a child's health. The official document was placed on her pristine white front door just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a fiery orange glow over the rows of identical driveways and manicured lawns. The impact of legal consequence rippled through the neighborhood like the sound of thunder on a cloudless day. The community began to shift, subtly but undeniably, as though water had been disturbed in a sinking boat. Posts in the HOA's private Facebook group began disappearing, and threads mocking the mini-fridge eyesore, or making passive-aggressive jokes about overprotective parents and their dramatic medical setups were erased. Quiet whispers spread behind closed doors. Some neighbors agreed that Karen had gone too far, that it was just a fridge, and perhaps, just perhaps, Cassie had a point. But outside, there was silence. No one spoke up for Cassie. No one brought over a casserole, no one offered sympathy or support. The same neighbors who had waved at her for years now crossed the street when they saw her, as if guilt were contagious. And Karen? She played the victim. At the next HOA meeting, hastily arranged at the community clubhouse, Karen stood tall, her signature pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescent lights. A tight smile stretched across her face, though it didn't reach her eyes. She addressed the room with the composure of a politician at a press conference, her voice cool and almost mockingly calm. "I think we need to step back and remember why we formed this HOA in the first place," she began, scanning the room for approving nods. "To maintain the integrity and aesthetic of our community. We cannot allow exceptions and personal preferences to take over. We need clean yards, consistent appearances, and pride in our neighborhood. Is that too much to ask? No fridges on porches, no random boxes nailed to fences, no unsightly appliances. What's next? Porta potties on front lawns?" A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some shifted uneasily in their seats. A few heads turned toward the back of the room where Cassie stood near the exit, arms crossed over her chest, her jaw clenched. Karen, emboldened by the approval of her echo chamber, continued. "We can't allow one emotional situation to undermine the standards we've worked so hard to maintain. This isn't personal, it's policy." Cassie didn't speak. She didn't have to. The silence that followed Karen's words spoke volumes. No one backed Karen up. No one challenged Cassie. The unspoken truth settled like an unspoken verdict in the air, heavier than any argument could have been. The story soon spread far beyond the neighborhood. By the end of the week, news outlets began covering the incident, first as a human interest piece, then as something darker: HOA chairwoman charged with attempted murder after destroying child's insulin. The headline was blunt, unavoidable, and brutal. Radio hosts debated it live, morning anchors read it with furrowed brows, and online forums exploded with outrage. The public reacted with fury, with many sharing Cassie's name alongside hashtags demanding justice. Strangers sent letters of support. A local journalist penned a viral column titled "When Aesthetic Kills." The courthouse hearings followed soon after. The first was held in a gray, beige civic building that reeked of paperwork and cold air. Karen arrived first, stepping out of a black sedan, her tailored navy pantsuit a sharp contrast to Cassie's worn-out blouse and scuffed shoes. Her hair was perfectly styled, her expression rigid. She was followed by an elite defense attorney, 2 steps behind her like a silent shadow. Flashbulbs popped, reporters shouted questions, but Karen walked with a perfect, stiff composure. She didn't flinch, but the slight twitch of her eyelid, the white-knuckled grip on her leather bag, betrayed her. Cassie arrived 20 minutes later, alone, except for her cousin who carried a backpack stuffed with medical records. She was disheveled, not there to perform but to tell the truth. Her folder was filled with highlighted tabs, and her hands shook ever so slightly as she pulled it out. She didn't come for the cameras or the press. She came for justice. Outside, the crowd had grown significantly, more than just journalists now. Parents, nurses, activists, teenagers in hoodies, and adults in scrubs had gathered. They carried signs and chanted slogans, their voices rising like a tidal wave, crashing against the courthouse steps, insulin is not garbage, rules don't justify cruelty, children over cosmetics, and Karen's law kills. Mothers held photos of their diabetic children, children with insulin pumps clipped to their belts held signs reading, "Could have been me." Karen tried to walk through it all with dignity, chin high, eyes cold, but the crowd didn't part. They watched her. The cameras zoomed in. In that single moment, a photographer captured her, face half in shadow, lips pressed together, staring into a crowd that no longer respected her authority. In her eyes, there was no confidence, no defiance, only fear. By the third hearing, the courtroom was packed with reporters, local parents, and quiet onlookers who had followed the story since the beginning. The atmosphere was thick, not only with anticipation but with judgment. Every cough, every squeak of a bench, every click of a pen felt like a silent proclamation. Cassie sat near the front, hands folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. Her attorney flipped through notes beside her, but Cassie barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the prosecutor, who stood solid and unmoving in front of the jury box. Then, the shift came. The prosecutor announced that new evidence was being presented. He clicked a remote, and the lights dimmed. The footage on the screen was grainy, but clear. The timestamp read 2:11 p.m. The footage showed the side of Cassie's house, partly obscured by a bush. Karen Bishop appeared in the frame, wearing gardening gloves and holding a pair of bolt cutters. She approached the fridge, her eyes darting around, like someone caught in the act of stealing. She cut the cable securing the fridge and opened the door. The camera captured everything: boxes of insulin pens, syringes, and thermal storage packs. Then Karen uncoiled a hose from the side of the house and sprayed the fridge's contents with cold precision. The insulin was tossed into a trash bag, and the fridge was rolled toward the street, disappearing off-screen. There was a long silence in the courtroom. The video paused on the final frame, Karen wiping her hands on her shorts as she walked away, as if she had just completed a mundane task. The prosecutor turned toward Karen, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Did you think the Red Cross symbol on the fridge was decorative? The prescription labels, the bright orange warning tape, the markings that said, 'Do not touch'? Did the thermal casing look like part of a mini bar?" Karen opened her mouth but no words came out. The prosecutor stepped closer, his voice steady. "You didn't just throw out garbage. You destroyed a regulated medical device and a child's insulin. You did it without permission, without inquiry, and with utter disregard for the consequences. And that child nearly died." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. A juror shifted in her seat. Even Karen's attorney leaned forward, uncertain how to proceed. The judge cleared his throat, tapping his gavel for order, but the shift had already happened. Karen's defense had collapsed under the weight of the undeniable evidence. What had been a simple HOA dispute was now a matter of reckless endangerment, criminal negligence, and attempted murder. Cornered by the evidence, isolated by public scorn, and stripped of her once impenetrable confidence, Karen finally cracked. Her attorney, tight-lipped and clearly exhausted, requested a private meeting with the prosecution, no cameras, no press, just hushed voices behind closed doors. The offer was quiet, desperate. Karen would plead guilty to a lesser charge, perhaps reckless endangerment or property destruction, if Cassie agreed to withdraw the attempted murder accusation. No public trial. No further press. A clean exit. That same afternoon, Cassie sat in a sunlit consultation room just outside the courtroom, her eyes never leaving Jacob, who was dozing in a chair beside her, his small body wrapped in a fleece blanket. His hands still bore faint bruises from injections, his fingers curled slightly in his sleep. Cassie's heart swelled, and she whispered, her voice steady but filled with resolve, "She wants a deal. She wants mercy." The attorney hesitated, glancing at Cassie. "It's your call, Cass. You have every legal right to refuse." Cassie reached out, gently brushing her thumb over Jacob's knuckles. She shook her head slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," she said, her resolve hardening. She has to answer for it. Not just for us, but for every family that's ever had to defend their child's illness to someone who saw it as an inconvenience. For every mother who's had to justify a medical fridge, a service dog, a wheelchair ramp, to someone more concerned with property value than with human life. Her eyes lifted, meeting her attorney's gaze. Tell them no. The refusal spread through the courthouse like wildfire. By the time word reached Karen, her attorney was already visibly pale. Cameras began to gather outside, microphones pointed toward every door, and reporters whispered with growing anticipation. Karen stepped outside, clearly rattled, her face flushed as she was forced to navigate the sea of media gathered along the courthouse steps. At the top of the stairs, she paused. Her pearl necklace was askew, and a slight smudge of mascara had settled beneath one eye. Then, the dam broke. I was just trying to keep our neighborhood clean. Karen shouted, her voice shrill and wild. That's all I did. I did what no one else had the guts to do, and now I'm the villain. As cameras swiveled, she continued, her voice cracking. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't know it was medicine. You're all hypocrites. You know that fridge looked awful. None of you wanted it there. Her voice cracked, pitching upward. I was just following the rules. I was doing my job. The crowd immediately turned against her. Booing, shouting, anger rising like a storm. A man in a hoodie yelled, "Your job isn't to play God with someone's kid." A woman pushed through the crowd, holding a glucose monitor in her palm like a battle flag. You think this is cosmetic? She shouted. Karen's face twisted in a mix of fury and panic. Behind the glass doors, Cassie watched, unmoved. This had long ceased to be about HOA codes or petty neighborhood rules. It was now about control, about who got to decide which lives were worth protecting and which were considered too much of an inconvenience. And the crowd had made its decision. The jury found Karen guilty. It wasn't just vandalism. It wasn't simply an HOA dispute gone too far. The evidence was irrefutable. The court understood the truth. This was a deliberate act that nearly cost a child his life. Karen was charged with attempted murder through the destruction of vital medical supplies. Cassie sat still as the judge read the sentence. 3 years in state prison, permanent removal from any HOA leadership positions, a lifetime ban from administrative roles, mandatory psychological counseling, and restitution, both financial and public. Karen didn't protest, didn't shed a tear. In her orange jumpsuit, she stood with her jaw set, her expression devoid of emotion. Her once perfect composure had cracked weeks ago. All that remained now was silence, the kind that follows a collapse. The courtroom didn't cheer, but the weight lifted as Karen was led away. She glanced around the room, searching for any sympathy, but there was none, not from the neighbors she once ruled, not from the mother she tried to intimidate, and certainly not from the child she had endangered. For the first time, Karen understood something crucial: power built on fear has an expiration date. Back in the neighborhood, the shift was immediate. Some residents packed up and left, unable to bear the weight of their complicity. Others remained, but they had changed. They waved at Cassie now, no longer crossing the street when they saw her. Some apologized, though others couldn't bring themselves to do so. And then, the signs began to appear. Wooden placards in front yards, first 1, then 5, then 20, "We support families, not rules." A fridge saved a life. Karen doesn't speak for us. There were no meetings, no speeches, just quiet rebellion, with paint, hammers, and determination. Cassie didn't ask for it. She just kept doing what she had to do, walking Jacob to school, packing his insulin kit, and waving back when someone honked their horn in support. Justice hadn't healed everything, and it hadn't erased the trauma. But it meant she wasn't invisible anymore. And that, in itself, mattered. By the end of the week, Karen's name had been erased from every HOA file. A new board was quietly elected, no drama, no self-appointed rulers, just a simple note in the meeting minutes: new leadership. Zero tolerance. Cassie read it once and smiled, though not big, just enough. 1 year later, Cassie didn't just move on. She moved forward. With help from local donations, medical advocates, and a surge of grassroots support, she launched a non-profit organization called Jacob's Hope. It was named after the little boy who almost didn't make it, and the strength he had inspired in her. The mission was simple but powerful: help families of diabetic children access tools and supplies that insurance often failed to cover: medical-grade refrigeration units, continuous glucose monitors, emergency insulin kits, and educational resources. By the end of the year, the foundation had helped over 400 families across the state. The next year, that number doubled. Volunteers from all walks of life joined her cause: nurses, teachers, tech workers, single parents, some strangers, some neighbors who had once turned away. Cassie worked late nights and early mornings, often with Jacob curled up beside her in a blanket while she answered emails or filled out grant applications. She wasn't a politician, and she didn't seek the spotlight. But now, her voice carried weight, not because it was loud, but because it had earned its place. When reporters repeatedly asked, "Do you regret taking it all the way to court, turning it into something this big?" Cassie always answered the same way, her voice calm, but certain: "I didn't go all the way. I only just got started." Jacob was 9 now, taller, stronger. His laugh was back, loud and unfiltered. He wore a silver medical necklace with a QR code linked to his emergency data. He knew how to check his sugar. He knew how to speak up for himself. He had become something Cassie never imagined: a confident young boy who could play outside again. He kicked his soccer ball on the same yard, the same sidewalk. But now, just a few feet away from where the fridge once stood, there was a new sign. Hand-carved and sealed against the rain, it read, "Here lives a mother who refused to let her son be sacrificed for silence." No one dared remove it. No one asked her to. Across the country, other HOAs quietly rewrote their policies. New clauses were added, and exceptions were carved into previously rigid rules. Words like medical necessity began appearing in homeowner handbooks. Not because a law was passed, but because a precedent had been set. They remembered what had happened in that small neighborhood. They remembered the mother, the fridge, the fight. And no HOA board, no neighbor obsessed with symmetry, had the audacity to call a life-saving appliance an eyesore again. Because now they knew. And now they had a name to remember: Jacob's Hope.